My name is Nora Fenwick. I'm 29, and for 6 years, I've worked fraud analysis for a regional insurer, which means I spend my days reading the small lies people tell on paper, the altered dates, the mismatched signatures, the numbers that almost add up. 3 weeks ago, I found one of those lies in my own family's mail. My grandfather left me a life insurance policy worth $18,400. My parents cashed the check. Not lost it, not misplaced it, cashed it, in a bank 40 minutes from their house, using a signature that wasn't mine. I didn't confront them. I didn't call. I opened a case file instead, the same way I open every other one. And 3 days after I sat across from my mother at her kitchen table and let her tell me, calmly, that family doesn't need permission to help itself, an investigator knocked on her door. She still doesn't know I was the one who made the call. Welcome back to The Quiet Ledger, where we tell true, unhurried stories about the people who finally balance the accounts nobody else would settle. If you've ever been the one expected to forgive the unforgivable because it was easier for everyone else, this one's for you. Drop a comment with your city and what time it is where you're watching. I read every one. And if this story finds you, stay to the end, because the knock on the door isn't even the part that surprised me most. But let me take you back 14 months, before the funeral, before the check, before I understood exactly what my family thought I was for. I grew up in Marion Falls, Indiana, a town of about 4,100 people built around a grain elevator you can see from almost any street in town if you know where to look. There's one diner, one hardware store that's been there since before my parents were born, and a paper mill 3 miles out that used to make the whole town smell like wet cardboard whenever the wind came from the east. I grew up on that smell. I didn't think to hate it until I left. My father, Denny Fenwick, ran a small contracting business, mostly roofs and additions, a few kitchens when the roofing dried up in the winter. He was well liked around town. The kind of man who shook every hand at the hardware store and never once left a job unfinished, at least not one anyone was paying attention to. My mother, Pam, kept the books for the church and half the small businesses on Main Street. People trusted her with their money. She was careful with decimal points and careless with everything else. I have one brother, Cole, 3 years older. Cole was easy to love in the way that cost nothing. Good-looking, quick with a joke, always the center of whatever room he walked into. I was the other one. Not invisible, exactly. Just useful. I made good grades without anyone checking, kept my room clean without being asked, and by 14, I'd already learned the family math. The less you needed, the more room there was for the people who needed more. I started working the summer I turned 16. Ringing up gas and cigarettes at the Marathon station on Route 9. At 19, I took a community college course in insurance and landed an intake job at a regional carrier's claims office 40 minutes away, filing the paperwork nobody wanted to read closely. I read it closely anyway. By 24, I'd moved into fraud analysis, the department that exists because somewhere, on some form, somebody is always lying. Today, I'm a senior analyst. I drive a 9-year-old Corolla with 140,000 miles on it, paid off 2 years ago. My apartment is small and mine. My one indulgence is a coffee grinder that cost more than my last car payment, and I've never once regretted it. Because it's the only thing in my life nobody else has a claim on. The one person who ever seemed to notice that about me was my grandfather, Walt Fenwick. My father's father, a retired machinist who lived alone on the edge of town in the same house he'd raised my dad in, with a workshop out back that smelled like machine oil and cut pine. Grandpa Walt didn't say much. He didn't need to. When I was 12, he taught me to true a wobbling bike wheel by feel, spoke by spoke, and told me the thing I still think about more than almost anything else anyone's ever said to me. People show you who they are with money, Nora. Watch what they do when nobody's counting but you. I should have listened harder. The first time I understood what my family actually meant when they said the words, family takes care of family. And they said those words often, the way some families say grace. I was 22. Cole, 25 at the time, wanted a truck he couldn't qualify for on his own. My parents asked me to co-sign. I remember sitting at that same kitchen table, my mother's ledger books stacked neat at one end like they always were. My father saying it wouldn't be forever, just until Cole got on his feet. I signed. 11 months later, Cole stopped making payments. Nobody called to tell me. I found out when a collections letter came to my apartment with my name on it, because my name was the one actually attached to the loan. I paid it off myself, $6,200, most of what I had saved, quietly, over 4 months, without telling anyone how close it had come to wrecking my credit. When I finally mentioned it at Thanksgiving, my mother didn't apologize. She refilled her wine and said, "Well, that's what family's for, Nora. We fix each other's mistakes. That's what we do." Cole didn't say anything at all. He didn't have to. Nobody in that family ever had to say much when I was the one absorbing the cost. That was the first entry in the ledger, though I didn't call it that yet. The second came 2 years later, at Grandpa Walt's funeral. He'd passed quietly in his sleep, the kind of death people call a mercy, though it didn't feel like one standing in that funeral home in a gray dress I'd bought the day before, because I owned nothing appropriate for burying someone. At the reception afterward, my father and my Uncle Ray stood by the coffee urn with a folder between them, talking in the low, efficient tone men use when they're already past grief and on to logistics. I caught fragments, probate, the workshop, before it gets complicated. Grandpa Walt hadn't even been in the ground 4 hours. I said nothing. I filed it away instead, the way I file everything, in the part of my brain that keeps records other people assume I'll forget. The third came 8 months later, when my parents asked me to co-sign a refinance on their house. I said no. It was the first time in my life I'd said no to either of them about money, and the silence that followed lasted 11 days. When my mother finally called, she didn't ask how I was. She asked, in a voice gone thin and careful, whether I understood what it meant to turn my back on the people who raised me. I told her I understood exactly what it meant. She hung up first. There was one person in that family who ever said the quiet part out loud. My grandfather's longtime friend and the executor of his will, a retired attorney named Harold Abernathy, called me 2 weeks after the funeral, ostensibly to confirm my mailing address for probate paperwork. Near the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, he said, "Your grandfather thought a great deal of you, Nora. More than he ever said to your face, I imagine. He made sure of a few things before he passed. I'd keep an eye on your mail if I were you." I didn't understand what he meant until the policy documents arrived 3 weeks later, confirming what I hadn't let myself hope. Grandpa Walt had named me sole beneficiary on a life insurance policy worth $18,400, not split with Cole, not routed through my parents, mine, specifically, by name. That was the last kind thing anyone in that family ever did for me without expecting something back. The check should have come to my apartment. It didn't. Through a mail forwarding mix-up nobody has ever fully explained to me, the insurer's records still listed my childhood address as my mailing address of record, an old form I'd filled out at 19 and never updated, the kind of small clerical thread that whole lives can unravel from. The check arrived at my parents' house on a Tuesday in March. I know this because 3 weeks later, doing something I do almost automatically now, I ran a routine check on the claim status through our industry's shared verification system, the same tool I use every day for other people's cases, out of nothing but professional habit, curious whether the payout had processed. It had. Deposited, endorsed, signature on file, mine. I hadn't signed anything. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't rage. It was the specific, cold clarity of recognizing a pattern I'd been tracing my whole life, finally showing up in a format I actually knew how to read. I pulled the endorsement image. My name was there, in handwriting close enough to fool a teller on a busy Tuesday, but not close enough to fool someone who spends her working life comparing signatures for a living. The loop on the N leaned the wrong direction. The cross on the F was too high. It wasn't my signature. It was my mother's version of my signature, the same one she'd used to sign my school permission slips when I was too busy to be found. The same handwriting I'd watched slant across 100 church ledgers. I didn't say a word to either of them. Instead, I did exactly what my job trained me to do. I opened a file. I documented the discrepancy through the proper internal channel, flagged it to our Special Investigations Unit under standard procedure, and let the case move through the system the same way any other flagged claim would, anonymously, procedurally, without my name attached to the referral beyond the analyst code assigned to whoever caught the case first, which happened, this time, to be a colleague 2 departments over named Priya Anand. I told her nothing except what the discrepancy report already showed. I let the process be the process. Then I did the hardest thing I've ever done in that family. I said yes when my mother called 2 days later and asked me to come to Sunday dinner. "We haven't seen you in months, Nora," she said, her voice warm in the particular way it got right before she needed something. "Just family. Your father's making the pot roast." I told her I'd be there. I drove out to Marion Falls that Sunday, already knowing what she didn't, that a case number existed with my grandfather's policy attached to it, that somewhere in a queue 2 floors above my own desk, a request had already gone out for banking records tied to the deposit. I didn't know yet how fast it would move. I only knew it was moving, and that for the first time in 29 years, I wasn't the only one in that house keeping a ledger. The house looked exactly the way it always had, vinyl siding gone slightly yellow at the corners. My father's truck backed into the same spot it had occupied for as long as I could remember, the porch light on even though it was still afternoon. Inside, the table was set for 4 with the good plates, the ones that only came out for holidays and, apparently, for whatever this was. My mother had made the pot roast. My father sat at the head of the table the way he always had, and Cole was there too, which told me something before anyone said a word, because Cole never drove the 90 minutes from his apartment in Fort Wayne for an ordinary Sunday. We made it through most of the meal on small talk. My father's latest roofing job, Cole's new girlfriend, my mother asking twice whether I was eating enough. The particular kind of concern that costs nothing and means less. It wasn't until the plates were cleared and my mother brought out coffee that my father set his cup down with a small, deliberate click and said, "Nora, we wanted to talk to you about something." I already knew what was coming. I'd known since the invitation. But I let him say it anyway, because I wanted to hear exactly how he'd frame it. "Your grandfather's policy," he said. "The payout. We took care of it. There were some expenses that came up. The truck needed a new transmission, and honestly, Nora, your mother and I have been underwater on the house since the refinance fell through. We used the check." I kept my hands still in my lap. "You used my check." "It's family money," my mother said, gently, the way she might correct a child's grammar. "It's not like it went to a stranger. Your grandfather would have wanted us taken care of." "He named me on that policy specifically," I said. "Not the estate, not you, me." My father's jaw did the thing it always did when he was choosing patience over honesty. "You don't need it the way we do, sweetheart. You've always landed on your feet. We just borrowed it." Borrowed it. As if there had ever been a conversation. As if a signature that wasn't mine constituted a loan agreement instead of what it actually was. Cole, to his credit, or maybe just his comfort, didn't say anything at all. He drank his coffee and looked at the tablecloth, the same way he'd looked at the tablecloth the night I mentioned the $6,200 truck payment, the same practiced blankness he'd perfected his whole life for exactly this kind of moment. "We just need you to understand," my mother went on, "that this doesn't change anything. You're still our daughter. We're still a family. Family takes care of family, Nora. That's all this was." I let the silence sit there for a moment before I answered, because I wanted to be sure my voice came out even. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't change anything. It just confirms it." My mother smiled, mistaking my calm for surrender, the way she always had. She reached over and patted my hand once, satisfied, the matter closed as far as she was concerned. I didn't correct her. I finished my coffee, thanked her for dinner, and drove home in the dark with both hands steady on the wheel, thinking about Grandpa Walt's workshop and the way he used to true a wheel, a little pressure here, a little there, until the whole thing ran straight again, without anyone outside the room ever knowing it had wobbled at all. 3 days later, on a Wednesday morning, my mother called me at 9:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I was at my desk when the call came in, 2 floors below the office where Priya Anand's investigation had, by then, already run its course. My mother's voice on the phone was not the voice from Sunday dinner. It was thin, fast, cracking at the edges. "There was a man here this morning," she said. "From your insurance company, an investigator. He had copies of the check. He said someone flagged the signature. He said it could be considered fraud. He asked your father for bank statements. Nora, what is happening?" I sat very still at my desk, my own case queue open on the screen in front of me, 3 other people's discrepancies waiting for my attention the way they did every day. "It sounds like someone did their job," I said. "You have to fix this," she said. "You work there. You can make this go away." "I don't have that authority," I told her, which was true. I never had. I'd only ever had the authority to notice. "Nora," her voice dropped, pleading now in a register I had never once heard from her in 29 years, not even at my grandfather's funeral. "We're your parents." "You forged my signature," I said. "That's not a family matter, that's a federal one." The investigator, I learned later through the same case status system I use every day, had asked my father 3 questions before he ever raised his voice. Whose signature was on the endorsement, who had access to the mail that week, and whether either of them could produce documentation of my consent. My father, I'm told, went very pale answering the second question, because the answer to the second question was the same as the answer to the first. My mother, the woman who had balanced other people's books with such tidy, trusted precision for 20 years, had nothing in writing to explain why my name was on a signature line she'd written herself. I want to be honest that I felt no triumph hearing about it. What I felt was something closer to relief, the particular, exhausted relief of watching a wobbling wheel finally run true. Not because I forced it, but because I had simply, finally, stopped holding it crooked to protect everyone else's comfort. I didn't go to another Sunday dinner after that. My mother called 11 more times over the following month. I answered 3 of them. My father sent 1 email, long and defensive, that used the word misunderstanding 4 separate times and the word sorry not once. Cole texted a single line, "This is really messed up, you know." And I never learned whether he meant what had been done to me or what I'd allowed to happen to them. And by then, I'd stopped needing to know. That was 4 months ago. The claim is still working its way through the appropriate channels. That part isn't mine to narrate here, and I wouldn't if I could. What I can tell you is what my life looks like now, on the other side of a decision I spent 29 years too afraid to make. My apartment is quieter these days, not sadder, just mine, in a way it never quite was when I was still leaving room in my week, my budget, my patience, for a family that had always treated my restraint as a resource to be spent rather than a kindness to be returned. I still grind my own coffee every morning. I still drive the same Corolla. I still keep a ledger, professionally and, I've come to accept, personally too. But these days it only has one name on it. Family takes care of family, my mother used to say, like it was scripture. I believe that now more than I ever did growing up in that house. I just finally understand that it has to run both directions, or it isn't family taking care of anything at all. It's just one person, quietly keeping the books, while everyone else spends what was never theirs. If this story meant something to you, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and stick around. Next week, I'm telling you about the letter my grandfather left me that nobody else in my family knows exists yet.